I'm James Fratzke, and this is Leaders. On each episode, I'll interview a proven leader, CEO, entrepreneur, or founder and unpack their story of success. Welcome to part 2 of our interview series with Rand Fishkin, the founder and former CEO of Moz SEO. If you are in the SEO or digital marketing world, then you've probably used Moz.com. And it's hard to imagine Moz without its founder and former CEO, Rand Fishkin. But even if you haven't heard about Moz or seen Rand with his unique hairstyle and mustache, this is a can't-miss conversation. We kick things off with Rand sharing the story of how he went from $500,000 in debt to growing Moz into a profitable company. This is a very heartfelt, real interview. We talk about topics ranging from Rand's struggle with depression to how to navigate the difficult world of accepting venture capital from investors. So without further ado, enjoy part 2 of our interview with Rand Fishkin. Rand, thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure, James. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's all our pleasure. And I want to start this with a tough, hard-hitting question. How long does it take you to do your hair / your mustache in the morning?
Mustache doesn't take any time anymore. Thankfully, Moz is now profitable, has been for almost a year, so I got to shave off my mustache. That was a foolish facial growing stunt. Yeah, I wouldn't do that again. Hair, I don't know, the usual amount of time, 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, well, you do have maybe the best looking hair on the internet. And so I find that hard to believe, sir.
It is pretty fast. I mean, I have my morning routine down to 25 minutes at this point, right? So I can hop in the shower, I can shave, I can do my hair, brush my teeth, put on deodorant, everything, 25 minutes. So I know, if I have a meeting at some time, that's how long I need.
Well, that makes sense. And I want to talk about the mustache a little bit more later, but let's set the scene a little bit because you have a pretty amazing entrepreneur story. And so I'm going to set the scene a little bit and you can kind of fill in the blanks. But in 2001, you dropped out of college and started a web design / digital marketing company with your mom. By 2005, you had over $500,000 in debt. Your words, not mine. You did a crap job of building a business. Fast forward, though, now Moz is doing over $40 million in revenue. With $500,000 in debt, I'm not sure I would have seen the light at the end of the tunnel. So tell us, how did you not just throw up your hands and give up at that point?
Actually, that probably would have been the smart thing to do. Bankruptcy is actually a great sort of get out of jail, relatively free in the United States. And so that would have been the savvy move. The problem was we didn't tell my dad that we had any debt. And we were basically in a rock and a hard place because if we had declared bankruptcy, it's possible that the courts could have gone after like my parents' house. They owned a second house, my grandmother's house in Connecticut. And so my grandmother might have lost her house and we weren't sure, if my dad found out, probably he would get very upset with my mom and, maybe that could lead to even worse things. So we had to keep slogging through and eventually pay back our creditors. So it's a lie. It was a lie of omission that forced us to soldier on, which is not exactly the greatest motivation, but it is a strong one.
Sometimes when you're backed into a corner, Rand, the only thing you can do is move forward, right? And that's what you did. And then that's a theme throughout your entire career. That's why you started SEO Moz back in 2004, because you were frustrated with how the SEO world worked. It was very secretive. So you decided to lean in and kind of shed some light into that industry. Yeah,
I did. I think, again, I'm something of a contrarian. And this being told that SEO was this secret world and that, it's not supposed to be transparent and that the secrecy is how the SEO consulting world sort of makes its living by having this knowledge that no one else can access. That frustrated me immensely. That made me, pissed off. It made me want to open things up, right? So I started running my own experiments and writing about things that no one else was writing about. And I wouldn't sign, confidentiality agreements with clients.
I love that.
so that I could share, stories and all this kind of stuff, which, at the time seemed purely like there Rand goes again, being his crazy self. But it ended up paying off, right? In the long run, it ended up paying off because Moz became this place that people knew and could trust to give them open and honest information and resources about this hard-to-learn field. And because so few people were doing that, Moz had a much easier time standing out, right? It wasn't the crowded, competitive landscape that it is today. And so, by building up that educational resource, by being a place that helped people, by being transparent, we built up this massive community, and that led to a lot of consulting clients in those early years between '04 and '07. And it led to, a great number of people subscribing to our software between 2007 and today.
I have to tell you, Rand, that I actually started using Moz.com a very long time ago, way, way, way back when I knew nothing about SEO. And it's been this great tool to kind of do this trial by fire and learn and watch some of your videos from Whiteboard Friday. And so I just want to personally thank you so much for the wisdom that you've installed in me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to hear it. Yeah, our pleasure. That's great.
So you once said in an interview that startups are like video games. What did you mean by that?
The first time you play a video game, you're terrible at it, right? You don't know how the level is going to go, and you're not familiar with the controls, and you probably mess up and lose points and, die a bunch and all those kinds of things. But then the second playthrough, the third playthrough, the fourth playthrough, you sort of get into a groove with it, right? You know how everything's structured. You build up some muscle memory around it. The controls flow more freely. As a result, you get better at playing the game, right? You're able to advance or score more points or whatever it is, whatever the objective of the game is, right? You improve your skills and you get better. And that is exactly how I feel about startups. I think that every time you face a new stage of the startup journey, you're going to suck at it, right? You have all these problems you experience and things you've never seen before and challenges you never imagined. It's very frustrating, and the unfamiliarity is extremely frustrating. And then the second time you do it or the third time you do it, you've seen this story play out before, right? And so you know the pitfalls to avoid, and at least you can not make the same mistakes you made last time. And I think that's where the analogy works, is that it becomes easier. But the problem with startups is that each new stage is like a new game, right? You carry over some skills from having played video games at all or having run your startup to this point, but the new ones that you face, the new challenges you face are daunting every time. And that's, I think, why it's so hard to build a large business successfully.
Now, I saw in an interview one time that you said that it was never about, when you started Moz, it was never about wanting to get rich. Rather, it was always about wanting to add a lot of value to the world. Do you think entrepreneurs that are going through that video game and playing the levels over and over again are missing that key objective, that it's about providing value and it's not about creating something that doesn't necessarily need to exist in the first place?
Well, I think that happens sometimes, but actually I might disagree with my own quote there. I think that it is true. It is true, for me, that early in my career, it was like, hey, how do we just dig out of debt? And then, hey, let's keep doing all these fun things. But once I took venture capital, my whole professional identity was tied to, okay, I've made a commitment to these investors that I'm going to return 5 to 10 times their money, before their fund expires. That obligation is one that I feel very strongly. Even though I'm leaving Moz, I still feel very strong. I feel terrible about not being able to get our investors to the liquidity that we sort of promised we would deliver. Moz may be successful by many business standards, but by venture standards, it's kind of a failure, right? It has raised, $28 million. And so unless it can double its revenue again and get to an IPO level exit, it's going to be really tough to return, $150 to $300 million to the venture firms that have put money into Moz. Yeah, I would say the financial side is a really big one, especially when it's someone else's money and you have promised to deliver on that.
If you could go into a time machine and do it all over again, would you still have taken the VC money, or would you have taken a different path?
I would have taken the VC money for this company. And the reason why is because I know how I felt before. It was one of those grass is always greener things, right? Where I felt like, oh, I'm not a real entrepreneur because I'm not venture backed, right? I'm not a real player. I'm like this fake, wannabe, oh, I'm a lifestyle business, which is always used as a pejorative in Silicon Valley speak. And I think it took me going through the venture experience to realize how deep a load of bullshit that is. Right? How totally mind-bendingly dumb that mindset is, and I think without the experience, I would never have had that. I would always have been looking from the outside in and thinking, well, I never took a stab at a real one, or I'm not nearly as good an entrepreneur. Not that we should be comparing ourselves, right? But as all these other people who've raised money, and I don't go to these parties in Silicon Valley, and I've never been to Zuckerberg's house, and dumb stuff, totally dumb stuff, right? But it's questions that eat away at you, and so I'm glad I did it for this one. I think I learned an incredible amount, and I think that next time I'm going to be a lot better, a lot smarter. I'll know how to play the game.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you want to be a photographer, go work for a photographer, break their camera. And you've said something very similar, Rand, which is if you want to build a startup, go work at 2 or 3 different startups to learn on their dime. And that's kind of, in a sense, what you've done with Moz. You've built this great company. Now, as you get ready to go into your second act, you can take your learnings from that startup and kind of propel yourself to success maybe a little bit faster.
I'm going to be starting another business. Definitely not raising venture for this one. Probably raising money of some kind, maybe angel money or crowdfunding or something like that, or even debt. But yeah, I did all right with debt last time. It could work.
You kind of kicked its ass.
Well, yeah.
Dad's ass.
First it kicks my ass, then I kick it. Yeah. But yeah, I think that was a learning process, and going through it will make me better at it for next time. I don't intend to become a sort of a practitioner of SEO or something like that.
So let's talk a little bit more about Moz and you personally, Rand. From 2007 to 2013, you were the CEO of Moz. Before that, obviously, you were the founder. But in 2014, you stepped down as CEO. Can you explain to us, and you've talked about this before in the past, but can you explain to us why you decided to step down as CEO?
I stepped down because I had an episode with depression. And because of that, I think that my judgment was compromised in a lot of bad ways, and I was not emotionally or mentally the leader that Moz needed at the time. And I think that was the right decision. But it was a very hard period for me, and it was I would say it felt like a low friction decision. But afterward, it's been a painful one too, right? I think it's always tough to lose control of something you built and that feels like it's yours and should be yours. And yeah, that was a really hard thing. I spent a lot of time going through the why did I build this company? Why? What purpose did that serve? And do I really regret that? And do I wish I'd done something different with my the first sort of 15 years of my professional life? So it's been difficult. Yeah.
Well, this isn't unique to you, Rand. I mean, you hear a lot of stories of different CEOs or entrepreneurs that struggle with depression. And on the surface level, it's kind of counterintuitive, like, oh, these outgoing, super driven people, how can they suffer from depression? What do you think the connection is between high performers and CEOs and this condition?
So I think that there are 2 things that are almost certainly true. One is that people who are likely to pursue entrepreneurship are also people who are more likely than average to have anxiety, depression, mental and emotional issues. And I don't know which way the causation runs. I don't know if there's a third factor there, but there's definitely a strong correlation in my experience. I think the second thing that's true is that the pressures of entrepreneurship, remember, especially in the venture-backed technology world, the failure rates are staggeringly high. Survival rates are miserable. So almost everyone who pursues this path is going to fail at it, and that means losing their job and sacrificing years of their career and usually incredibly stressful hard years of their career, and usually not making any money from that. That is a very stress-inducing thing. And I think also people management and people leadership is very stressful, especially for people who are empathetic and kind and sort of feel the feelings of others. You take a lot of shit and you don't get a lot of love in return. I've often said, right, that CEO is a terrible, terrible job. Not a fun one, not a cakewalk by any means. If you manage to get your company into a nice place, I mean, it's great that you have a nice salary or nice income, but that's small comfort. I think for a lot of people, they would trade it for, well, software engineering. You can work 40 hours and make a real nice salary there too.
Yes, you can.
So yeah, I think those three things all combine to make it more likely than most that a lot of entrepreneurs will experience these severe episodes.
I'm sure there's plenty of people in a very similar position to yours, Rand, that suffer from depression. So what are the one or two tactics that you use today that help you counteract some of those feelings you have?
So early on, I did a lot of therapy and counseling. I tried a bunch of all sorts of other things as well. Everything from acupuncture and massage to physical therapy to mindfulness and meditation, and probably some others that I'm forgetting. So it was trying to discover those things. And certainly, I have found that there's a pretty big mind-body connection, at least for me. Meaning that if I can stay physically healthy, if I can hold myself very strictly to getting 8 hours of sleep a night and not waver too much on that, certainly not for long, that helps a lot too. I think lack of sleep, which entrepreneurs suffer pretty horribly, is very, in the research, very connected to anxiety and depression and all sorts of disorders. And yet, this is one of those other things that I just hate. I hate how Silicon Valley culture takes pride in working 80-hour weeks, right? It's like, oh, I'm so important. I'm such a hard worker. I so deserve my success. Look at me working so hard and not sleeping. All the data and research says, actually, that's terrible for you. It's terrible for your company, terrible for your performance. Less than 3% of all human beings can function even remotely above 80% of capacity after a night with less than 7 hours of sleep. It's dumb, right? Like what you're doing is hurting yourself and your company and all the people around you. And your venture investors should be pissed that you're not getting enough sleep. But tragically, that's not how the culture goes. So those things have really helped me.
I feel like that ties back to a story you shared earlier about a lifestyle business versus what some would consider a quote unquote real business. For entrepreneurs that want to follow in your path, what's your recommendation? A lifestyle business or real business? How would you attack that today?
No, I mean, I think that what I would recommend is just knowing exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it, knowing the odds and the risks that you face by embracing that choice, and then choosing the right capital source or no capital source to pursue it, right? So if your goal is, hey, you know what, I'd like to be my own boss. I want to be independent. I want to build something. The thing that I want to build can be built with, a few $100,000 or $1 million of investment. But I don't think I want to be forced into a world where I need to make it $100 million a year business in order to be considered even a minimal, that's the lowest bar for success. Then venture is probably not right for you. And you should look at angel or crowdfunding or debt funding or revenue loans or, a bunch of other options that exist in the market today. However, or micro VCs, right? There are a few micro VCs who have funds small enough to where a $1 million investment and a $30 million exit can be meaningful returns for them. But the majority of venture, that's not the case. If, on the other hand, what you realize is like, you know what, I want to change the way energy is stored and delivered around the planet, and it's going to take a few $100 million of investment. And I realize the odds of success are 1% or less, but that's what I want to do, and I think I have a way to get there. Venture is definitely for you, right? That is the model. They want to invest in 99 companies that are going to die and one that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar success. And great, if you believe that that's what you want to pursue, and you have a model that matches theirs, excellent. Just go in with your eyes open.
You've talked in the past about understanding your strengths and weaknesses and doing the things that you do really well, the best that you can, and hiring people that do your weaknesses really well to do the best that they can. Can you tell us a little bit more about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think you framed it pretty well. The only caveat I'd add to that is sometimes you just don't have to build a muscle, and you can avoid engaging with it entirely by building your company or your organization or your product in such a way that it doesn't lean on this weakness. I'll give you an example. So I hate sales. I'm not sure if I'm not good at it, but sort of morally, I don't like it.
Right.
I hate the process. It always feels inauthentic to me. Right. So consulting was always a big sales process, right? The first part of it is, of course, selling the client and then closing the deal. And then a lot of consulting is keeping the client around, which means ongoing selling to them. And part of that is relationship building. And that means that you have a somewhat inauthentic relationship because part of it's based on your financial concerns, right? And so, that was not tenable for me. And so pivoting Moz into a company that was product-based and self-service, and self-service SaaS was very uncommon, especially when we started. It's still uncommon today. Most SaaS is still enterprise and enterprise sales driven. That worked really well for me, right? Being able to say, you know what? I don't need a sales person. I don't need a sales director. We don't have any salespeople here at Moz. If you want to be sold the product, visit the website. And that enabled us to get to, a very, very large revenue number without investing in sales, without having to build that muscle. A friend of mine, Tara Reid, runs this apps without code business out in Detroit. And, she has built businesses and helped other people build businesses without having to learn software engineering, despite the fact that they are fundamentally tech businesses. Super cool, right? Like you can find a way around nearly any weakness without necessarily needing to just hire for that weakness. You can also, shortcut it.
I think that's a strong takeaway. I think a lot of entrepreneurs who are getting started want to put everything on their shoulders, and they're almost scared to involve other people because they have a feeling of like, well, I'm the only one that can accomplish this the way that it needs to be done. So to your point, bring other people into the mix, and that will help you from burning out, and it will allow you to actually see the project grow into something that down the road could be successful. I promised that I was going to bring the mustache back up, and I'm going to do that right now. And by the way, with your Whiteboard Friday videos, you're always wearing fun and colorful shirts. So if you could just send me your stylist's number, I'd really appreciate that. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of personal brand? You used to wear yellow shoes to conferences. You have the mustache. Is it important to establish personal brand? Can you unpack that for us?
Oh, man, it's sort of a weird topic for me because so the yellow shoes were, initially just this tactic that Geraldine was my girlfriend at the time. Now she's my wife. Geraldine recommended. She was like, well, you're going to your first conference and nobody knows what you look like because you've been using an avatar that, isn't actually your face. And so she was like, well, just buy these bright yellow shoes and tell people you'll be wearing them. And then you'll recognize all your friends from the forums and the, chat rooms. And I did that. And yeah, it was great. It was not a personal branding thing. It was more like, oh man, I want people to say hi to me and I want to know someone and not be totally alone at this big conference in New York. And then it sort of stuck, right? It was like, oh yeah, Rand, he's that guy with the yellow shoes. So I occasionally wear them on stage and I still do. Maybe once a year, I'll pull them out and wear them at an event. Yeah, it's just sort of a fun thing. The mustache was also not a personal branding thing. That was just before I stepped down as CEO, I told everyone at Moz that, hey, I'm making a commitment. I believe that it's incredibly important, despite the fact that we're a venture-backed company, for us to be profitable again. I think that'll let us control our own destiny, and we won't be forced to do layoffs, and I think that'll be really healthy for the business. And so I committed I'm going to grow out my mustache until we're profitable again. This was the end of 2013. So fast forward, I stepped down from the CEO role in 2014, and my successor decided, actually, that's not that important. We're not going to pursue profitability. And so, for 3.5 years, I had a ridiculous mustache.
You talk like you don't like it, but I feel like it's so iconic to you.
Well, thank God.
So it's interesting to hear the backstory.
Yeah, it's been gone almost a year now, and I don't miss it. It was a nightmare on humid days, and it was this constant reminder. Every time I looked in the mirror, I just think to myself, we're still not profitable, right? Like this company still isn't profitable. And unfortunately, the way that we got there, this was last August, was the worst way possible, which is we did have to do big layoffs. I think we lost about 60 people in layoffs, which was terrible. I mean, there were friends, people who were close friends with Geraldine and I who won't talk to us anymore, right? Brutal. It's totally terrible. It worked out well for the business. Like we ended up, being able to grow a little faster, and there was more focus. The marketing team, performed a little better. The product team, I think, performed better, and engineering did too. So there were a lot of good things from the business side of things. So I think it was the right move, and it's great to be, to know that Moz is profitable and doesn't have this risk, but just the worst way to get there.
You mentioned your wife, Geraldine, and in the research that I've done for this podcast interview, I've seen your guys' relationship, and from what I've read online, it just seems like you guys have such a strong bond. And you've even used the words that she loves you unconditionally. I think for entrepreneurs or even people in the business world that are trying to climb the corporate ladder, it's so hard to have the best of both worlds. It's incredibly difficult to try and progress your career or build a business and have a successful relationship. So how do you and your wife do it? What's the secret?
I'm trying to remember who wrote this great blog post. I think it was called "You Can Do Two Things but Not Three," and I thought that was actually excellent advice. So it was basically, you can be incredibly devoted and focused on your work, and also have a very powerful, close relationship with your significant other, partner. But you can't do those things and also be a passionate hobbyist about something, or, and also be an incredibly devoted parent, right? And so many, many people that I know, make those choices, right? They're sort of like, hey, my work is work. I clock in my 40 hours. Then I have my hobby and I have my kids, or I have my kids and I have my spouse, or, I have my, whatever passion, right? Whatever big thing they have in their life. For some people, it's a dependent, right? I have my aging parents that I need to take care of, and that sucks up all the rest of my time. And so that's one of my two things, so these aren't always choices. Sometimes there are things that are forced on us, but I think that in my case, I'm very lucky. We've chosen not to have kids, and I've chosen not to do anything else. And so I've just been focused on Moz and Geraldine. And that's I think what's enabled me to, have a close relationship. Obviously, a big part of that is choosing the right person, but a big part of it too is just choosing to invest in that person. I think people say something like, they think of love the wrong way, right? They think of, I'm deeply in love with this person, almost like an infatuation. I admire them, and I like the way they look, and I like the way they make me feel, as opposed to love, the active verb of, I am willing to make all sorts of sacrifices so that our relationship benefits. I am willing to, lose arguments that I think I'm right about. I am willing to sacrifice time and things that I want to do. I am willing to make changes in my behavior that I don't really want to make. I'm willing to overlook things about the other person's behavior that I don't really like, so that we can have a closer and more loving relationship. And that takes effort. Like that is active, cognitive and emotional and physical work. But I think that's what love is, not this sort of objectification of love as a passive thing.
Right. Love is, Stephen Covey says that in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is like, love is something you do. Let me shift gears real quick, though. In the past, you've talked about the importance of understanding your business, not just from the perspective of running the business, but understanding actually the products and the services that you provide. So for an example, in your business, you weren't an expert coder, but you learned how to code so that when your coders came and talked to you and said, hey, this is project stalling or it's taking long because of X, Y, and Z, you could basically empathize with them or call them out on their BS. So can you just share with us the importance of a leader who actually knows their stuff?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems many non-technical, I'll use this as an example, but it could be, non-marketing savvy founders will find this all the time with their marketing team and recruits, right? They don't know much about marketing. They haven't invested much in the practice. Maybe they have surface level knowledge and they feel like, well, it's relatively intuitive. I'm sure I can just sort of figure it out. And then, they go through marketing leader after marketing leader and team member after team member and poor results every time. And, and they find themselves in this space where they just can't effectively recruit, can't effectively lead and manage because they just don't have enough, base level knowledge to be able to do that. And I found that with myself in software engineering. So look, I know enough about HTML and CSS. I know enough about, basic level, very simplistic programming. I even know a little bit about, machine learning and have played around with some friends with TensorFlow and that kind of stuff. But I don't really get it. I am not a software engineer. I haven't written a line of code since 2005. And as a result, when I come up against these projects at Moz that took, months instead of weeks or years instead of months, I'd be constantly frustrated and I'd be questioning well, is it me? Is it the leadership? Is it how the project's being worked on? Is it the team? And so I'd cycle these people out and kept getting stymied, right? Like every new person would be like, no, it's just really hard. It's really hard. And then finally, recently on one of the biggest projects around this, we got two guys in, and they sort of took a project that had been languishing for 7 years and basically made it work in 8 months. And I had this oh, okay, gotcha. That's what success looks like. I didn't understand it, but these guys are dedicated and they know what they're doing. And so they were able to do it. And still, even now, reverse engineering what went wrong so that I can prevent it in the future, with my next company or with future companies I might advise. Nightmarishly difficult. I can't understand it, right? It is not evident to me. I've had lots of conversations, even with these guys who did solve the problem. They're not sure. I'm not sure. Sucks, right? It really is nightmarish. I think if I had the savvy to be able to at least contribute mildly to the project or review, the code, review the engineering architecture, the schematics, the approach, with savvy, thoughtfulness, and experience, I think I could have prevented, 7 years of waste.
I think the main takeaway there is that as a leader, you always have to be thirsty to learn more, to understand more, and that's going to help propel your business forward. You just said, oh, that's what success looks like in your last comment, talking about coders. What does success look like for you, Rand? What is your guiding light?
I think success for me at this point is I need to prove that I can build a great, successful software business. And I think that means, starting from scratch again, building something that is valuable and useful and helps a lot of people and creates a lot of value and also makes a lot of money and hopefully has either a successful exit or just continues to operate profitably for a long period of time with lots of happy employees and customers. That is something that I'm very, 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 very dedicated to. And I think I'll be pursuing that for a long time. I hope this next one will be the one, but we'll see.
Rand, as we get to the end of our time together today, this is when I like to go into what I call rapid fire question mode. So I'm going to throw some questions at you and you just give me the first things that jump to mind. Question number 1. If you could write a postcard to anyone on this planet, could be an icon, past or present, a family member, whoever, who would you write that postcard to and what would it say?
I think the people who would appreciate it most and the most joy that I would get from it is writing it to my grandparents. I know they love to get mail. I really should do that. That would be what I do. Should write a postcard to my grandparents, tell them I love them. They're in their 90s now. They still live on their own in New Jersey. But yeah, they've been big supporters and caregivers to me for my whole life. So,
next question. Do you like to read?
Yeah, I do. I read an incredible amount.
So what are those top 3 books that you recommend? It could be fiction, nonfiction, business, whatever.
Ooh, yeah. Let's see. I'll give you some recent ones that might help. I'm mostly a fiction reader. I do read some nonfiction, but primarily a fiction reader. I really liked Special Topics in Calamity Physics. That was a great book that I enjoyed tremendously. I read it a few years ago, but really, really good one. I loved Sherman Alexi's. Well, I love a lot of his stuff, but Sherman Alexi's Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I think that was a great one. If you're looking for something more in the business realm, there was a great biography of the founder of duty-free shops, Chuck Feeney. Okay, it was called The Billionaire Who Wasn't, and it's a great biography. Really fascinating. You know, he became a billionaire and then basically gave all his money away, and started the Giving Pledge, which now Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and a lot of other very wealthy people in the U.S. are part of.
That is such a great cause. I've definitely heard of that. Okay, so you dropped out of college, and some people think that the college system is broken in America. If you could do it all over again, would you have went to school, or would you have just skipped that entirely?
I think of college mostly as a socialization process. I think the really frustrating thing, well, tragically, it's also a status symbol. It's a way of sort of signaling to future people that you are part of their class and world. And unfortunately, that still has a lot of benefits, at least in American society. I'm pretty sure I would have still gone to college. Granted, it's so much more expensive today. And the brutality of student loans and student debt is just a nightmare, right? Like, when I was in college, this was before George W. Bush had passed the legislation saying that you couldn't declare bankruptcy to get out of your student loans. And that legislation essentially led to the inflation of college prices, right? So they've been growing at about, I can't remember, 1%, 2% year over year for the prior 20 years. And then they started growing at 4 or 5%. And so you got, 10x growth since I left college. And that has meant that many people who go to school and graduate can't do anything with their, financial lives because college debt takes up all of it. And predatory lenders have taken huge advantage of that law. So I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ever going to forgive him for that. I think he ruined a generation. But, that being said, yeah, I would probably still go to college, especially if my parents could afford to pay for it, or if I could get, a scholarship or find a very cheap institution, because I think there is value in the socialization. I think there's value in the signaling.
All right, next question. You're sitting in a bar. It's raining outside. You're in Seattle, and you have an option: beer or Scotch. Which one are you drinking tonight?
If it's before dinner, I'm probably getting beer. If it's after dinner, I'm almost definitely getting Scotch.
Nice. Now tell me, what kind of Scotch you're going to get?
So I'm a single malt guy. I don't like blended. I don't like American whiskey either. So with rare occasion, I don't like bourbon. Mostly single malt, Scottish or Scottish style. The Japanese and the Tasmanians, and there's some good distilleries. I think there's a great distiller in Taiwan now. So I'll drink something from that world.
Lovely. That sounds delicious. Okay, here's the last question, Rand. If there was just one message that you could share with our listeners that you were unable to do so far in this interview, I haven't given you the opportunity to share it. What is that one takeaway that you would want to share?
If lots of people and society and culture tend to believe one thing and to bias us toward that thing, I would question that. And I think that's true of just about everything. I think that's true, true when it comes to something like college. I think it's true when it comes to investing. I think it's true when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to gender roles, when it comes to relationships, work careers. If there's something everybody else is doing, there's probably a good reason to question it.
That is a good point. And you've said that before too. If you're starting a business and a lot of people are running away from that area because it's too complicated, you like to run towards those things.
Yeah, well, I especially like to go towards it if it's sort of not sexy, right? Like everyone thinks it's scammy or like, boring or it's over. Like that trend is over. It's not really all that exciting anymore. Great, excellent. That's the time. That's the time. Bitcoin, I'm not interested. Like I have no interest. It's super hot right now. Everybody's talking about it. That means no interest, right? I just don't care at all.
Right.
Something like, I feel like maybe social media marketing sort of feels like it was very hot 4 or 5 years ago and it's sort of died down. I'm interested in that again, right? I'm interested because no one's talking about it anymore. It's not like the hot buzz that it was years ago. That makes me interested.
That makes sense. Rand, where is the best place for people to follow you and see what your next act is?
So I'm most active on Twitter, and there I'm at Randfish.
Rand, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, quick note before we leave. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Leaders. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review. As we try to grow the show and invite more leaders to share their stories, every subscribe, rating, and review really helps expose the podcast to new ears. And a quick thank you to today's guest and our sound engineer, Jonathan Costco. Until next time, I'm James Fratzke. This episode of Leaders is brought to you by Fratzke Media. We're a digital marketing consultancy focused on leading brand transformations through digital storytelling. Our portfolio of clients ranges from venture capital firms to Fortune 500 companies. For more information, go to fratzkemedia.com and fill out one of our contact forms. We'd love to tell you more about how we can lead your brand's digital transformation.